Welcome. Welcome to A Taste of Justice. I'm Professor Angela Mae Kupenda. This semester in the series, I'm posting on the First Amendment class that I am teaching to my students remotely. Now, the First Amendment includes speech clauses, expression, also about the press, and also religion clauses. At my school, we occasionally have other classes on media law, and we have other classes that address religion. So here, we're just going to do a brief overview of the religion clauses for the First Amendment course. There are two religion clauses in the First Amendment. One is called the Establishment Clause. The specific language is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And we know that this clause also applies to states by using the First through the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause. This provision provides essentially for a wall of separation. You have church, we have the state, that there should be a wall separating the two. Now, most people probably agree that there should be some separation of government and the church and the state, referring to state government or federal government. But where the disagreement likely lies is how high that wall should be. In the separation, should there be a really high wall dividing the two, or should it be a thinner or lower wall? And that's really the debate that occurs in many of these cases. The other religion clause is called the Free Exercise Clause. The language from the Constitution is, Congress shall make no law nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, the free exercise of religion. Now, excuse me one second. Excuse me. Now, in this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Establishment Clause. And I say brief, it may be 30 minutes. And then in the follow-up video, I'm going to discuss the Free Exercise Clause. Now, the interpretation, and before I get into interpretations, let me point out to you that there are so many cases interpreting the First Amendment. All explanations here of these cases are my own and are not to be ascribed to my school or my students. For informational purposes, I'm a professor at Mississippi College School of Law, and I've been teaching for about 30 years. Okay, now the Establishment Clause. The first case we have about the Establishment Clause is from a case called Everson versus Board of Education, going back to 1947, yes. And again, the case names and their dates are all in the text below this video, so you can go back and read them for yourself. Okay, now, in this law, in this case, there was a law that said that the government would help pay the transportation costs for parents to send their children to school. Now, government was going to make these payments regardless of whether the child was going to a public school or if the child was going to a private religious school. and a taxpayer brought suit saying that the government giving this money that benefited private religious schools was in violation of the Establishment Clause, the separation of church and state. What do you think? Now, the court upheld this law. Now, some of the reasons the court gives for upholding the law are justifications that still may be used in cases. So it's very important to remember these points. First of all, the court said it is a general law. It was not just giving money that may benefit religious institutions. It was a general law to benefit all of the families who had children going to school, whether they were going to a public school or to a private religious school. Okay. Secondly, the court said, look at the purpose. The purpose of the payments is to help in terms of the education of children. And that's a general purpose. The court also said that these payments were not being given just to the parents who had their children in religious schools, but the payments were being given to the parents of children, whether they were in public school or in a private religious school. So, and plus the court pointed out that the funds were going to the parents and not going directly to the religious institutions. So the court upheld this as being constitutional and not a violation of the Establishment Clause. This case is important, though, for another reason. It's important for some language that appears in the opinion as to the kinds of things that would be a violation of the Establishment Clause. And I have typed this language below in the text box. But the court said, and I'm going to read some of this to you. It says, neither a state nor the federal government can set up a church. That the government cannot go out and set up a church. Neither can pass laws which aid one religion, all religions, or prefer one religion over the other. They said neither can force or influence a person to go to or to remain away from their church against his will, or force him to profess a belief or disbelief in any religion. And it also said, no tax in any amount, large or small, can be levied to support any religious activities or institutions. Now, as I was reading that language, it was coming to my mind that there may be some current First Amendment issues as related to some of that language. When we get to the part in a few weeks where my students are going to present, you see how happy I am about this. They're going to make presentations on current First Amendment conflicts. You may see some of these issues coming up related to the Establishment Clause. Just hold on, it's going to be coming and it's going to be a very exciting time. Now, in this case, the court also said that the Establishment Clause is intended to erect a wall of separation between church and state. But remember, I cautioned you that much of the debate has to do with how tall that wall should be, how thick that wall should be that divides the church from government. So by now you're thinking that in all of this First Amendment material, we come up with a test. So you're likely asking, what is the test for Establishment Clause violations? Just like we had a test for obscenity, we had a test as related to defamation. We had a test as related to fighting words. So you're likely asking, where is the test for Establishment Clause violations? Well, there are a lot of tests. There are a lot of principles as our country continues to grapple with what is the meaning of the Establishment Clause. So you're like, well, if I'm studying for the bar exam, I say you may need to be prepared to argue alternatively several different tests to arrive at your conclusion. But let me start with a test that has recently been, it's been criticized, but it is still a test, I believe, for use in Establishment Clause issues. And you'll know you're dealing with an Establishment Clause issue when it appears that government is entwined with the church, or where government is benefiting or injuring religion, okay? So the first test is called the lemon test. Yeah, like a lemon for lemonade, the lemon test. And it takes its name from a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, a 1971 case. Now, what happened in that case is that the state wanted to give extra money to the teachers who were teaching at religious schools if they were teaching subjects like science and English. The state wanted to make sure that the children attending private religious schools had teachers who were well paid. So what do you think the court did? The court declared that law unconstitutional, that it was against the Establishment Clause, unconstitutional. But the court laid out a test, a three-part test for Establishment Clause issues. The court says, first, you look to see if the law has a secular legislative purpose. So the first requirement, the law has to have a purpose unrelated to religion, a secular legislative purpose, not just a religious purpose. Does it have a secular legislative purpose? If not, then it is in violation of the Establishment Clause. The court said, secondly, the law's primary purpose must not advance nor hold back religion. Not advance religion, but don't hinder religion either. And thirdly, the law must not foster an excessive entanglement with religion, because the idea is that we separate church and the state. So if the governmental law entangles church and state, we may have an Establishment Clause problem. So this first prong, the law must have a secular legislative purpose. It led to a number of state and federal laws being deemed unconstitutional. See, you have to remember that when the majority rules, when the majority controls the legislature, and in some places, that majority that's controlling the legislature may be in like what is called the Bible Belt, then the majority may be very much in favor of using taxpayer money to support religion, especially the religious views of the majority. So many of the laws that were struck down did not have a secular, non-religious purpose. The laws were very much in favor of the majority view as related to religion. Let me give you some examples of some of these cases that the court deemed to be unconstitutional, that they violated the Establishment Clause. The first case is I'm going to mention is Wallace versus Jaffrey, a 1985 case out of Alabama. So at first, Alabama had a law that allowed for, in public schools, a moment of silence or meditation. Now, during that moment of silence and meditation, the children, the teachers could, get themselves ready for the day. They could sit quietly. They could be in silence. They could meditate. They could even pray silently if they chose. So that was what the first law said. But then Alabama went back. They said, do they really know they can pray? We want to make sure they know they can pray silently if they want to. Now, they could have prayed if they wanted to, but the Alabama legislature wanted them to know for sure they could pray silently if they wanted to. So they went back and they revised the law, and the revised law said for meditation or voluntary prayer. So the court was examining this revised law, and it said there was no secular purpose. The reason they revised it, according to the court, was to make sure they knew they could pray. And so therefore, it did not have a secular purpose. So the court struck down the revised law as unconstitutional. Let me give you another one. Mccullum versus Board of Education, a 1948 case. Now, in Mccullum, religious teachers would go into public schools to teach about religion. And for the child to participate, the parents had to sign a release form, but the classes, the religious classes, were actually held on the campus of the public school. So they would be released from their secular classes in order to go to the religious class on campus. The court said this was unconstitutional. Where is the secular purpose in doing this? But then in another case, Zorak versus Clausen, also mentioned at the bottom in the text box, the students were released with their parents' permission to go off campus. They could go off campus for religious instruction at another facility, then come back to school. The court said this is okay. The court said constitutional because the teaching is not taking place on campus. The school children are only being released during a free period. So let me give you another one. Everson versus Arkansas. Now here, Arkansas had a law that said you cannot teach evolution in public schools. You cannot teach it at all. And the court said that is unconstitutional because the purpose, there is no secular purpose. The idea is to teach only a religious view of how we came to be here. But then there, another case I mentioned at the bottom, they go on, and I've mentioned them and given you a brief summary so you can go back and read them. Louisiana prohibited that the teaching of evolution unless you also taught creation science. So yes, the courses can teach evolution, but they must teach creation science too. And the court said that was unconstitutional. Where is the secular purpose? The cases go on. There was one about in one state that all of the schools had to post a copy of the 10 Commandments in every classroom. And we're referring to public schools because, in religious schools, of course, you can do these things. We're referring to public schools that are run by the government and paid for by taxpayer dollars. The court said unconstitutional. So all of these were struck down under the Lemon Test. And the Lemon Test says that there must be a secular purpose. So what other tests? Because see, the Lemon Test has been criticized a lot, that it strikes down a lot of legislation that under some other tests may be deemed to be constitutional. So let's talk about another test. So in addition to the Lemon Test, some justices, some courts use what is called neutrality to accommodate religion. They say the Lemon Test is too severe against religion, so too much of a separation of church and state. So they use what's called a neutrality principle, that the goal is to be neutral toward religion, to also accommodate religion where possible. So in a case called Wallace versus Tax Commission, so property was exempted from property taxes if the property was used exclusively for religious, educational, or charitable purposes. Then note property taxes on the property. And the court said that this is constitutional, that this refers to a historical practice, that also you're exempting educational and charitable purposes, so you're just accommodating religious. So the court said that was constitutional. Okay, another case, Mitchell versus him, there was a federal program that provided certain secular materials, like for the library or computers, to both public and to private schools, private religious schools. The court said that's okay, because you're not just giving the money to the religious schools, you're not just giving the computers to religious schools. But some of the justices said, no, you still have taxpayer money going to private religious schools. But the majority on the court said, no, that is constitutional, because you're not singling out religion to benefit it. You're just accommodating religion along with charitable and educational property. Let me give you another one. It's called Good News Club versus Milford Central School, a 2001 case. So this school allowed for school clubs, and school clubs were allowed to meet in the building after school hours. So what about religious clubs? What about a Bible club or a church club? Could it also meet after school hours in the school property? And the court said, yes, because you're letting other clubs meet, you have to allow this club to meet too. It's just accommodating. You're being neutral toward religion. You're recognizing that Bible club students may want to attend those too, along with other types of school clubs, like, I don't know, maybe the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or I don't know, other types of clubs, an art club or what have you. The court said that you can allow the religious clubs to meet in the building after hours too. That is constitutional. So you see this history we have in America in terms of religion. On the one hand, the framers said we don't want the persecution. We don't want religious persecution to occur. But then there has been a history of some type of accommodation of religion. The levied test says you have to have a secular purpose, but this neutrality principle, this accommodation, leads to possibly a different result in terms of how high this wall separating church and state should be. Let me give you another test that is also often used. It's called the Endorsement Test. So the Endorsement Test says that when it comes down to it, you don't want people to feel like outsiders. In a school setting, you don't want children who say are not Christians to feel like outsiders in the school. So the endorsement test says that endorsement of religion is invalid. I'm going to read this because it sends a message to non-adherents that they are outsiders, not full members of the political community, and a message to adherents that they are insiders, favored members of the political community. So the endorsement test says that if the government is endorsing religion, if a public school is endorsing religion or particular religious beliefs or religion, period, it sends a message to those who do not believe in that way. It tells them we're the in crowd, you're the outsiders, right? And it tells some people you're insiders, the others are not with us. And so that's the premise of the endorsement test. The endorsement test is frequently used when you have governmental symbols, governmental displays. So let me give you an example. Okay, Allegheny County versus ACLU. So Allegheny County decided to put up a holiday display around Christmas. So in the courthouse on public property. So in this display, they had a Christmas tree, they had Santa, they had the manger display of the birth of Jesus with symbolic representations of Mary and Joseph and the Christ child in the manger. They had a menorah, a Jewish religious symbol. So the court said the Santa is okay. The Christmas tree is okay. The court said that the menorah was okay, according to the court, even though it is religious in nature. The court said that the reasonable observer will be ignorant. The reasonable observer will be ignorant about the religious significance of the menorah. And so therefore, it will not be endorsing religion because they won't know. Now, the manger scene was in the display, but it was located at the top of a grand staircase, and everything else sort of posed around it. And the court said that the manger scene was not constitutional, not okay. They said it's in the main place. It's all attention directed to it. People understand the religious significance. And so therefore, it appears that in the courthouse, they are endorsing Christianity. And therefore, the court said it fails the endorsement test. Now, the court also said that you could take these same symbols and you can place all of them in a museum, and that would be different. Because in a museum, the court says, it sort of negates a message of endorsement. It's a museum. But as part of the county's holiday display, is sending out a message, and then some individuals would feel like outsiders, and some would feel like insiders. You know, there are even other tests that have been used with the Establishment Clause. One is the Coercion Test. And the Coercion Test, I think over later, I mentioned the Lee versus Wiseman opinion dealing with graduation and prayer at graduation. And the court said that a Christian prayer or prayer at graduation for K through 12 grades is likely unconstitutional. But if it was for a college, maybe the students would not feel coerced into adapting a particular belief because of the prayer. So for the coercion test, you're going to be looking at the age of the children who are involved. I mean, I've also mentioned below a case about prayers at a city council. And so you're like, well, what's the difference? Well, for the prayers at the city council, the case was Greece versus Galloway. The complaint was they were only using prayers by Christians, but then when a complaint was filed, they brought in individuals from other religious beliefs. And the court seems to say, well, you really don't have coercion there, according to the court, because you're dealing with adults who will know they do not have to adopt a particular belief. But the dissent is saying, no, you come into city council looking for something and they'll lay with a prayer, but you believe differently. You're not going to feel comfortable to disagree or to walk out. I mean, so we have all these different issues going on, all these other tests. Some justices have argued that we need neutrality, not just between religious groups, but between religion and non-religion. Some said we should have a strong presumption. We should not use religious symbols at all. Other justices say, well, don't use the lemon test, but look and see if it is predominantly a religious purpose. And others say, now hold up. Our country has a history and a tradition. You know, there's a legislative chaplain. The money says, in God we trust. Some justices say we cannot, we have to consider and give deference to our history and tradition, even if it has a religious nature. Probably the strictest test is the lemon test. And I've given you a citation in the text box to a recent opinion where some of the justices heavily criticized the lemon test. So is lemon gone in favor of one of these other tests that I've mentioned and mentioned below in the text box? I don't know. I mean, in if I were doing an exam or I was writing a bar exam, I would use several of the different approaches and argue the outcome under each. And I would still mention lemon. I could point out that it has been criticized. Where will we end up going with this as a country? I mean, what do you think? What direction do you think we should take? I leave it to you to think about. Isn't learning something? I mean, this path we're on to learn more about the Constitution and its interpretation. Look, the Constitution, learning about it will lead to our enlightenment. And hopefully that enlightenment will lead to freedom for ourselves and for others, and ultimately to justice. And if not immediately to full justice, perhaps at least to a taste of justice. So subscribe and sign up for notifications. You don't want to miss a thing.